So paper for me is a material that it's around all over the place. I've always used it. And when I choose a material, I choose a material that services the idea. So I don't look at the paper and make some kind of decision about what that paper is going to be. I say I need a heavy piece of paper and I find a heavy piece of paper. So in the case of these works, the paper on the background is a background, just as I said, for working with these different pieces which fell together. In terms of surface, I don't usually think about surface, except in these I discovered that the ink on the glassine puckered the surface and formed a way for light to get around the paper just a little bit, which I like very much. So in terms of the aluminum that you mentioned, paper was a model for the aluminum pieces.
So interesting.
So paper services my ideas more than my thinking about it as a material. I don't think about which material am I going to work with now. I think about which material is going to serve the idea.
So it's been you, Vicky.
Well, paper is, for me, is something very intimate. That first, I have many sketchbooks, so paper is very close to me. That a little piece of paper I can do a drawing. So it's something that I don't need to have a studio. I don't need to move. I don't need to have, it's very simple. But I work very different than Clytie because I am always asking and questioning and experimenting. So sometimes the paper is going to bounce back at me or bleeding or doing something that I wasn't expecting. So I have this dialogue with different papers, and sometimes I discover things. So I learn into the process of drawing. And with the relation with another material, I think the paper is not forgiving, because if you do something, you cannot have it back, take it back, and which is the same with glass. So that's something that I learned, to be very precise with the paper in a way, as much as I can be, and with glass, it's. Because I draw, that's all the process in glass is based on drawings, and based on drawings on paper first.
I want to ask you, what's the relation between these two surfaces of the foreground and the background being used by the same material?
Well, the paper is a base to work on. The way I work is I'll have 15 pieces of paper spread out in the studio. I'll have a pile of paper scraps and I start arranging them. So I need the paper in order to be able to move these unfinished pieces around and not destroy them. Mm-hmm. So in one sense, it doesn't make any difference whether this has what the color of the paper is or what the surface of it looks like. It just happens to be there. But what the size of it, more to the point as far as I'm concerned, is that this is a way of building space into the work. So if this piece of paper leaves the studio without any instruction to its admirer, somebody might put a frame right around the edge here that would that would focus the viewer into the paper, which is, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in focusing out and the eye being pushed out to the edge and beyond. So that's what it is. Okay. When I'm working, I'm focused on the drawing that's going into the work. When I fix these papers to the background, I'm not making a collage. I'm simply fixing the image at a point in time. Mm-hmm. And so, I understand that these can be read as a collage, which is it's a description of one dimension of the work, but there are other dimensions of the work. And the most important dimension to me is the drawing that goes on, and the drawing that goes on in the tearing of the papers.
But you consider it to be a drawing process or something?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So can you just elaborate on that? How does that translate to be into a drawing process rather than a collage?
Because I think anything can be drawing. I think you can take scissors and you can draw. You can take scissors and you can cut out. You can take a pencil and you can draw. You can tear paper and you're still drawing. If you're moving the paper at all, then there's some kind of intent that goes into it, which is describing an idea or describing whatever it is.
And this photograph, for example, a total accident. I was sick at home, and I tried to develop photos I did, and the paper was not correct. The paper I took began to bleed. And so it was the machine, my printing machine, and the paper, engaging a conversation with me, like, oh yes, you did that, but you see what we can do. And I think maybe it's kind of my Eastern thinking about, what a brush can do, that I tend in my studio to separate the elements, that the granulation of the pigment, because I work with pigment and I ground them, so the weight of the pigment and the range of just one color, and the medium, because each pigment needs a different quantity of medium. So I tend to deconstruct the technique also to see every element, and that's how then it changes the material, and that's something I like, because I don't like that we know already before looking what it is. Is this a drawing, is this a painting? And I like this moment that you don't know what you see, so you are looking at it. That's what we do as artists and painters, that we want to stop time, and that people are just, focusing and looking at what we do.
So you like, the idea of making viewers work a little bit harder. That it's not the immediate.
I work hard, so why wouldn't they,
Right.
No, what I'm talking about is hand-eye coordination.
Okay.
So that and in fact, maybe, we'll go on. There's something I brought I wanted to show you, but why don't you?
Yeah.
Well, this is my notebook, to interject this. This is a notebook. These are all small pieces of paper the same size. You would think lines on here that I made to construct a series of ideas a number of years ago. And out of all of these come my current work. So this is about drawing, and this is about drawing, and this is about drawing. It's also about a visual vocabulary. So when I work, this is what I work from and with, and as you can see, a lot of the lines and marks and tears in those are similar to lines like this.
So this is the prep work. Do you consider this being part of the sketching of?
Sure. Well, but my point, getting back to drawing, is that this is sketching too.
So it's very automatic gesture.
Where these land on the floor is sketching. It's a kind of random sketching too.
Right.
Or I can throw them over my shoulder. So drawing then takes on is a multi-dimensional process through time.
Mm-hmm. So do you work intuitively?
Yeah, it's completely intuitive. Nothing is completely intuitive, and nothing is completely random either.
Right.
But this is one technique in one way, and it certainly doesn't belong just to European surrealism. It belongs to, lots of people use this technique.
Maybe from where you guys are standing, there is this photographic feel to it. The accuracy of the semi-stone depiction. It's almost like quasi photographic depiction. To me, seems almost like a moon, a scene from the moon. So I think what's interesting to me again is looking at that relation between your photographic series over there that we saw and your drawing series.
Yes. That this is pigment and charcoal and on vellum, and I do grind my own pigment, and I have many different types of black. That black that when you grind and you mix them with the medium, it becomes gray. And some are very dark bluish, dark red, and etc. But what gives this feeling of the darkroom is the physicality of the pigment. Because even if I grind them very well, there is always, a kind of it's a tiny atom. It's like moving particles. So the relation with particles is very interesting because it's the way we see the landscape. I'm making some parallel with physics. I'm not a scientist, but it helps my mind to think about how to build an image, because it's never about a specific landscape. It's an evocation, but it's how do we recognize landscape. So working with pigment, there is something very mineral. So it's a very elaborate, and I'm working with medium, so it's like even the development in a dark room, because the mix of the medium and the little particles reveals and impregnates the paper, like even in the dark room, because the paper I use is very absorbent. So it's every element, that the paper, the pigment, the granulation of the pigment, the quantity of the medium. So it's highly technical in a way to have this feeling. And I crumple a little bit the end mark and eye mark, so that all the white line is the crunching of the paper. So this is taking me some time, but the drawing are instantaneous. I mean, I'm doing them. It's like the notes, I take notes, and these are the notes I take about landscapes. Very like a haiku, something very simple. And I would say, that I was talking to you the other day about Deleuze and Spinoza, and there is something that he says about there's something he says about the thinking. He said the thinking takes a lot of time. And artists, we know that about the practice of the painting, it takes a lot of time. But the emotional, it's 1 second. I mean, you perceive, you have an emotion, and there is not even 1 second, you perceive it. And what is mental takes a lot of time. So I would even refer it, that is, the mental state, and this is the heart state, the emotional state. Two type of velocity we have in the way we work. So this is the beginning, and this is then, what I'm thinking when I do that first. The Taoism would be much more even in the breathing, in the drawing, than in the vellum paper, right? Because we have, from nothing, that's we have the emptiness, and then we have the one in the Taoist thinking. So it's more like like the haiku. So this is, but you're right. I mean, the two of them are Eastern thinking. I think I'm very tuned in because of my origin. I mean, my grandfather was Filipino, and I used as a child to travel a lot. And because my mother had a quest for her origin, so I mean, I was very, very early on, and it influenced me a lot. As my teacher Henri Dimier, who was very influenced by Japanese. So that's how, also I take every element and I deconstruct the landscape. Because it's ideas of landscape. I mean, it's not landscape; it's abstraction, right. But it's connection between things. It's ideas put together in a very odd way sometimes.
What I try to do is to set up a situation where somebody looking at the work can bring to it what they want to bring to it. So I avoid direct reference to anything, though I cannot claim I haven't seen the landscape, I haven't been in it, or I haven't seen this, or I haven't seen that, and I don't mean to do that. I'm looking for something which is all-encompassing in a certain way, to reach for human music, in a way, a commonality that anybody can enjoy, but it's them. It's a space between my work and a viewer. Doesn't reside in the work.
I think your work is definitely multi-referentials. Can you talk about this dynamic between abstraction and figuration? It's a question to both of you. Okay. So everyone wants to start.
Well, it's an area I aim for, because what I am trying to do is to stop the mind from thinking about the work and enjoy the work. And the way to do that is to provide a hook for somebody to want to look at it, and they might say, oh, this looks like a plant, or it looks like a tree, or it looks like a leg. And then when it looks too much like that, I change the pieces a little bit so it can still be evocative but isn't specific. That's up to you, it's up to you, it's up to whoever looks at it, or to not look at it, that's fine too.
Well, I agree with Clytie, what she said. I mean, it's for me the formal aspect is much more important, and to have an abstract image which opens to possibilities, and also I hope to stop and contemplation, and so I tend to avoid something that would be too representational.
Yeah. Yes. Well, there's a history. There's a history in my work. There's a history of my involvement with certain elements. You see, there's a history of my involvement in my trying to animate surfaces, which is one instance in which I do talk about surfaces apart from what else is going on. So that's in the work. My history is in work. The history of everything I've seen and where I've been and people I've known, people who've taught me, people I've taught, is in the work in some kind of way.
So with your work, do you treat nature as more as a medium, or more as a subject?
It's an inspiration.
It's an inspiration. Okay.
It's an inspiration. I mean, I really I relate to Thoreau, that we're made of nature. We're part of nature, and I worship the beauty what's around us, and so I make a point in a way, you know. But it's what can I say? It's yes, it's always in my mind. I mean, and I think that we don't look. We always have too many references when we are looking at nature, and we don't look things as they are. So that's also what I'm trying to do.
And color-wise, when you work with color, because when we talked in your studio visit, you mentioned that black and red are very graphic colors, and orange color is something that is more of a warning. So the colors that you choose when you work, can you walk us through the process or tell us, how you choose your color palette?
Well, again, I'm not really entirely sure how I choose my color palette, but what I do is that I tend to I put a lot in my work and then I throw a lot out. Black I occasionally use because black and white is a really very simplified way of trying to get at some of the problems that I'm attacking in the work. Red I've used in recent work quite a bit because it is, I like red, and I like making all red drawings. It's another black for me. Orange is, we see orange, industrial orange around us all the time, and it's usually used to keep people away from manholes or things like that. So it's got a charge to it. So when I'm working, the colors I'm looking for are colors that are as if I make a green, I want a green that could almost be blue. It's the same way that I work with forms and with shapes. Is it might be this, but it might be something else. So it's a duality all the time. And color is, my lessons in color vary on. Looking at snow in Canada when I grew up are very particular to that. There's a shifting light that happens when you hit upon color that works on a certain surface.
Right.
I work with very specific pigment. I work with natural pigments, and the technique I've been developing through the years, I need pigment with a certain weight. So I've been, choosing colors and pigment which has a very specific chemical response to the medium. And I like monochrome because it allows me, thinning the color to show the range of the color, and it has a very specific vibration. And there's a physicality also, that there is something very embodiment, because it is pigment, that we have the real experience of the color as it is. So I like to have one color because of that.